The door slammed shut behind them, and Sarah knew they could never go back. Her brother's words still burned in her ears. "You're dead to us." Marcus held her trembling hand as they stood in the rain, watching the lights go out one by one in the house where she grew up. They had nothing now. No family. No support. Just each other, and a broken promise that love would be enough. But what they didn't know yet was that the house waiting for them, the one they'd find in 3 days, held something far darker than rejection, something that would force them to choose between their sanity and their survival. Something that had been waiting for people exactly like them. The rejection had come swiftly, like a blade through flesh. Sarah's family had gathered in the dining room, faces carved from stone, eyes refusing to meet hers. Her father stood at the head of the table, hands pressed flat against the wood. "You chose him over us," he said, voice empty of emotion. "Now live with that choice." Marcus had tried to speak, to explain, to defend their love. But the door closed before he could finish his sentence. They stood on the porch in disbelief, watching through the window as her family returned to their meal, erasing them from existence in real time. Marcus's family had been no different. His mother wept, but wouldn't budge. His father's silence was louder than any scream. The ultimatum had been clear. Leave her, or leave us. He chose Sarah. He would always choose Sarah. But choosing her meant walking away from everything he knew, everyone who had shaped him. The weight of that decision pressed against his chest every waking moment, making it hard to breathe. They spent 3 weeks in a cheap motel on the edge of town, watching their savings disappear like water through clenched fists. Sarah worked double shifts at a diner where nobody knew her name. Marcus took construction jobs, cash under the table, coming home with dirt under his nails and exhaustion in his eyes. At night they held each other in the thin mattressed bed, whispering promises about a future that felt increasingly impossible. They needed a home, a real home, a place where they could rebuild what their families had destroyed. The listing appeared on a Tuesday morning. Marcus found it while scrolling through his phone during a lunch break, sitting on a concrete block surrounded by the skeletal frame of someone else's dream house. "Sarah, look at this," he texted, attaching a photo. The house stood alone on a hill, surrounded by overgrown trees, its Victorian architecture both beautiful and unsettling. The price was absurdly low, suspiciously low. But they were desperate, and desperation makes people blind to warning signs. The real estate agent met them at the property the next day. Her name was Margaret, and she had the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been empty for a while," she explained, keys jangling in her hand. "The previous owners moved away rather suddenly." She didn't elaborate. Sarah noticed the pause, the careful choice of words, but said nothing. Marcus was already walking toward the front porch, his eyes scanning the peeling paint, the cracked windows, seeing potential where others saw decay. Inside, the house breathed. That's the only way Sarah could describe it later. The air moved in ways that didn't match the still afternoon outside. Dust particles danced in shafts of sunlight that cut through the gloom like golden knives. The floors creaked a language they didn't yet understand. "It needs work," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the empty parlor. "But it's ours. It could be ours." Before we continue, I need to ask, where are you listening to this story from? Which country? Which city? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love hearing from you all around the world. Margaret handed them the paperwork with trembling fingers. Sarah noticed the tremor but attributed it to age, to cold, to anything but fear. "There's one thing," Margaret said, her voice dropping to something almost confessional. "The basement. The previous owners kept it locked. You might want to keep it that way." She laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. Just an old woman's superstition. Ignore me. They signed the papers that afternoon. By the end of the week, they were moving their few possessions into the house on the hill. Sarah's brother had refused to speak to her when she called to tell him about the house. Her mother hung up, without a word. Marcus's family sent a letter through a lawyer, formalizing their disownment. The pain was fresh, raw, bleeding, but they had each other. They had this house. They had a chance to start over. The first night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the makeshift bed they'd assembled in what would become their bedroom, listening to sounds that houses make when they settle. Except these sounds didn't feel like settling. They felt like movement, deliberate, purposeful. Footsteps that weren't footsteps. Breathing that wasn't breathing. She pressed closer to Marcus, who slept with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the day hauling furniture up narrow stairs. "It's just an old house," she whispered to herself. "It's just an old house." Morning brought rational light and embarrassment over her nighttime fears. They spent the day cleaning, scrubbing years of neglect from floors and walls. Marcus attacked the task with ferocious energy, as if he could build their new life with his bare hands, one clean surface at a time. Sarah organized their belongings, finding places for everything they owned in this vast, empty structure. By evening, they were exhausted, covered in dust, and something close to happy. That night, the dreams began. Sarah found herself walking through corridors that didn't exist in the waking house, following a sound she couldn't identify. In the dream, she knew she shouldn't follow it. She knew something terrible waited at the end of the hallway. But her feet moved anyway, carrying her forward against her will. She woke gasping, Marcus's arms around her, his voice soothing her back to reality. "Just stress," he murmured. "Just everything catching up with you." But it wasn't just Sarah. Marcus had his own dreams. In his, he stood in the basement, a place they hadn't yet opened, and something spoke to him from the darkness. Not words exactly. More like knowing. A communication that bypassed language entirely. He woke with the certainty that the basement wanted them to enter, that it had been waiting for them specifically. The days developed a rhythm. Marcus worked on repairs, fixing broken stairs, replacing rotted boards, patching holes in walls. Sarah painted rooms, choosing colors that fought against the house's inherent darkness. They talked about the future, making plans that felt increasingly fragile. She would go back to school. He would start his own contracting business. They would prove everyone wrong. They would build a life so beautiful that their families would regret their cruelty. But the house had other plans. Small things began to shift. Sarah would place something down and find it moved hours later. Marcus would swear he'd locked a door only to find it wide open. The temperature fluctuated wildly, one room blazing hot, while another held winter in its walls. They made excuses. Old houses behave strangely. The heating system needs repair. We're imagining things because we're stressed. A week after, moving in, Sarah found the first photograph. It was wedged behind a loose baseboard in the hallway, yellowed with age. The image showed a couple standing in front of the house, their faces blurred as if they'd moved during the exposure. But it wasn't the blur that disturbed her. It was their posture. The way they leaned away from each other, creating space where there should have been closeness. The way their hands hung at their sides instead of touching. The way the house seemed to loom behind, them, swallowing them whole. She showed Marcus that evening. He studied the photograph under the kitchen's harsh fluorescent light, his jaw tight. "Previous owners, probably," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret mentioned they left suddenly. He handed it back to her, and Sarah noticed he wouldn't touch it longer than necessary. "We should throw it away. It's just junk left behind." But Sarah couldn't throw it away. She slipped it into a drawer, uncertain why she felt compelled to keep it. That night, she dreamed of the couple in the photograph. They stood in the same spots, but now their faces were clear. The woman looked like Sarah. The man looked like Marcus. Not identical, but close enough to make her heart race when she woke. Close enough to make her question what was real. The house began to whisper. Not literally. Sarah would have preferred literal. Instead, it planted thoughts that felt like her own, but weren't. Doubts crept in like fog. Did Marcus really love her? Or was she just his act of rebellion against his family? Had she given up everything for someone who would eventually resent her for it? The thoughts felt toxic, foreign, but they wore her own voice in her mind. Marcus felt it too. He'd catch himself thinking cruel things about Sarah, wondering if she was worth the price he'd paid. Then he'd shake his head, horrified at himself, unable to understand where such thoughts originated. They began to argue over nothing. A dish left in the sink became a symbol of disrespect. A forgotten errand became evidence of not caring. The space between them grew, inch by painful inch. 2 weeks in, the house showed them the door. Not the front door, the basement door. It appeared one morning in the kitchen, where Sarah was certain no door had been the night before. The wood was dark, almost black, with iron hinges that looked medieval. There was no handle, no visible way to open it. Just smooth wood and a sense of invitation that felt like, hunger. "Marcus," Sarah called, her voice thin with fear. "Marcus, come here." He appeared from the hallway, still holding the hammer he'd been using upstairs. When he saw the door, the hammer slipped from his fingers, clattering against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. "That wasn't there yesterday," he said, stating the obvious, because his brain couldn't process the impossible. They stood together, staring at the door, both feeling its pull. It wanted them to open it. The desire was so strong it was almost physical, a hand pressing against their backs, urging them forward. "We should call someone," Sarah whispered. "The police. Margaret. Someone." But even as she said it, she knew how insane it would sound. "Hello, officer." A door appeared in our kitchen overnight. They'd be hospitalized, evaluated, medicated. Marcus approached the door slowly, as if stalking prey. He pressed his hand against the wood, and Sarah saw him flinch. "It's warm," he said, his voice strange, like it's alive. He traced the edges, looking for a mechanism, a trick, a rational explanation. His fingers found a small indentation, barely visible in the dark wood. He pressed it. The door opened without sound, revealing stairs descending into absolute darkness. The smell hit them immediately. Not decay, not mold. Something older. Earth and time and something underneath that made Sarah's stomach turn. Marcus found a light switch, and a single bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, illuminating maybe 5 feet before darkness swallowed everything else. "I'm going down," he said, and Sarah grabbed his arm. "Don't. Please don't. Something's wrong here, Marcus. This whole house is wrong." He turned to her, and for a moment, he wasn't the man she loved. His eyes held something else, something the house had planted there. "We need to know," he said. "Don't you feel it? We need to know what's down there. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe. I create content like this regularly, and your support means everything. Now, let's continue." Sarah wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Marcus and run from this house, to leave everything behind and never look back. But another part of her, the part the house had been cultivating, needed to know too. Needed to understand what had been calling to them through their dreams. So she nodded, and together they descended into the basement. The stairs were wooden and old, each step groaning under their weight. The air grew colder with each descent, their breath visible in the dim light. The single bulb above them seemed to dim the farther they went, as if the darkness was actively fighting against illumination. Sarah's hand found Marcus's, squeezing tight, and he squeezed back. At least they had this. At least they had each other. The basement was larger than it should have been. Impossibly large. The house above couldn't contain this space. Marcus's contractor, mind tried to make sense of the dimensions and failed. They stood at the bottom of the stairs, the weak light barely pushing back the shadows that pressed in from all sides. The floor was dirt, packed hard by time. The walls were stone, sweating moisture that caught the light like scattered diamonds. And in the center of the room sat a trunk. Old leather, bound with iron straps, covered in dust thick as fur. It sat there like it had been waiting. Like it had always been waiting. Sarah and Marcus approached it slowly, their footsteps muffled by the dirt floor. Neither spoke. There were no words for what they felt, the mix of dread and compulsion, fear and desperate curiosity. Marcus knelt beside the trunk. His hands shook as he reached for the latch. "Maybe we shouldn't," Sarah said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. She wanted to see inside too. The house had made sure of that. Marcus lifted the latch, and the trunk opened with a sound like an exhale, as if it had been holding its soul breath for years. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, tied with string, organized by date, going back decades. Sarah picked up the nearest bundle, her hands trembling. The paper was yellowed but intact, the handwriting elegant but pained. She read the first line aloud. "To my daughter, who chose love over family." Her voice broke on the last word. Marcus grabbed another bundle. "To my son, who walked away from everything I gave him." They looked at each other, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. These letters. They were from parents to children, from families to those they'd disowned, from the ones left behind to the ones who'd chosen love over blood. Sarah sat in the dirt, reading letter after letter. Each one told the same story with different details. Children who'd fallen in love with the wrong person. Families who'd issued ultimatums. Choices made, rejections delivered. And each letter ended the same way. "I was wrong. Please come home. I was wrong." But these letters had never been sent. They'd been hidden here, in this basement, in this house that collected the rejected and discarded. How many couples had lived here before them? How many had stood exactly where they stood now, reading apologies that came too late, forgiveness that never reached its destination? Marcus found a letter from his own mother. His hands went numb. The date was from 2 weeks ago. "My dearest Marcus," it began. "Every day I regret the words I spoke to you. Every night I dream of calling you, telling you I was wrong, begging you to bring Sarah home. Your father cries when he thinks I'm not listening. We miss you. We love you. Please forgive us. Please come home." Sarah was crying now, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. She held a letter from her father, written 3 days after they'd left. 3 days. He'd regretted it after 3 days, and she'd been living with the pain for a month, believing herself truly abandoned. "Why?" she gasped. "Why are these here? Why didn't they send them?" The house answered, not in words, in knowing. The couples who'd lived here before, they'd never left. The house showed them the letters, showed them the regret, the apologies, the love that still existed despite the walls built against it. And then the house showed them something else, something that made them stay, something that made them forget about the letters, Forget about the families waiting for them. Forget about everything except the darkness the house offered in exchange for their pain. Sarah felt it first. A presence behind her, cold and patient. She turned slowly, and there in the shadows stood figures. Not quite solid, not quite transparent. The couples who'd come before. She could see their faces now, twisted with regret and longing, trapped between what they'd found here and what they'd lost outside these walls. They were warning her, or welcoming her. She couldn't tell which. Marcus saw them too. He stood frozen, his mother's letter still clutched in his hand. "They never left," he whispered. The couples. They found the letters, and they never left. The figures moved closer, and Sarah could feel their desperation like radiation. They wanted to speak, to warn, to explain. But the house wouldn't let them. The house held them here, feeding on their pain, on the exquisite agony of knowing forgiveness existed but remaining unable to reach it. Estruturou desenvolvimento narrativo, tensão, emocional e clímax da história. Estou na metade da história. Preciso agora desenvolver como o casal lida com essa descoberta, como a casa tenta mantê-los presos, e preparar para o clímax e a reviravolta final. Vou adicionar mais tensão e conflito emocional. "We have to leave," Sarah said, backing toward the stairs. "Right now. We take the letters, we go to our families, we leave this place." But when they reached the stairs, they found them gone. Where there had been wooden steps leading to the kitchen above, there was now only stone wall. The house had closed its trap. Marcus pounded on the wall where the stairs had been, his fists leaving bloody marks on the ancient stone. "No! No, we're not staying here. We're not becoming like them." But the house laughed. A sensation rather than a sound. It had fed before. It would feed again. It had brought them here specifically, chosen them from among all the other rejected couples in the world. Their pain was particularly delicious. Their love, particularly twisted by cruelty. The house would consume them slowly, savoring every moment. Days passed, or weeks. Time moved strangely in the basement. They tried everything. They screamed until their voices gave out. They searched for another exit, finding only more stone, more darkness. They rationed the single bulb's battery, knowing it would eventually die, leaving them in absolute blackness with the trapped souls of those who'd come before. Sarah's mind began to fracture. The letters called to her constantly. She would read them over and over, memorizing her father's words of regret, her mother's desperate apologies. But reading them without being able to respond was torture refined to its purest form. She could feel the house feeding on her anguish, growing stronger with each sob, each scream of frustration. Marcus tried to stay strong for her, but he was breaking too. His mother's letter haunted him. She'd written it in her own blood. He could see the brown stains on the yellowed paper, could imagine her sitting alone in her room, heartbroken, deliberately cutting herself to write words of love she was too proud to speak aloud. The house whispered to him, "Stay. Read the letters forever. You don't deserve forgiveness anyway. You chose wrong." But something shifted when they stopped fighting each other and started fighting the house. It happened on what might have been the 5th day, or the 5th week. Sarah was reading her brother's letter for the 100th time, when Marcus grabbed her hands. "Stop," he said. "Stop torturing yourself. That's what it wants. That's how it feeds." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. "But they loved us. They wanted us back, and we didn't know." "They still love us," Marcus insisted. "Present tense. We're not dead yet. These letters, they're bait. The house shows us what we lost to make us forget what we still have." He pulled her close. "We have each other. We chose each other. That was right. That will always Be right. The figures in the shadows grew agitated. Sarah could feel their confusion, their desperation. They'd forgotten this part. They'd forgotten that love, real love, didn't need anyone's approval. They'd let the house convince them that their family's rejection invalidated their choices, that the pain of being cast out proved they'd been wrong all along. "We're leaving," Sarah said, standing up. Her voice was steady now, certain. "We're taking these letters, and we're leaving, and we're going to make sure every family knows what they wrote. We're going to reunite everyone this house has tried to keep apart." The house reacted immediately. The temperature dropped so fast their breath froze in the air. The darkness pressed in, trying to suffocate them. The figures screamed. Actual sound now, released from whatever held them silent. They weren't warnings or welcomes. They were weapons, sent by the house to stop Sarah and Marcus from escaping. But Sarah had seen something the others missed. In the corner of the basement, hidden behind the trunk, was a small door. Not the grand entrance they'd used, a servant's entrance. An escape route from a time when this house was new, when it was just a house and not a feeding thing. She grabbed Marcus's hand and ran. The spirits pursued them. Not the gentle, sad figures from before, but twisted versions, corrupted by years of the house's influence. They reached with hands that passed through flesh like ice, leaving pain and frost in their wake. Marcus felt them grab at him, trying to pull him back, but Sarah's grip was stronger. She'd chosen him once. She'd choose him 1,000 times more. The small door was locked, rusted shut by time and moisture. Marcus kicked it once, twice, again. His foot broke through rotten wood, and cold night air rushed in. The most beautiful thing they'd ever felt. They tore at the opening, widening it, ignoring splinters and torn skin. Behind them, the house shrieked with rage, its very foundations shaking. They fell through the hole and into a night that felt like salvation. The stars above were incomprehensibly beautiful. The grass beneath them was real and solid and free. They lay there gasping, holding each other, alive. Behind them, the house stood dark and furious. But it couldn't follow. Its power ended at its walls. Friends, if you've stayed with me this far, I need to know. Where are you listening from? Which country is home for you? Comment below and let me know. And please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sarah still clutched the bundle of letters. Marcus had grabbed his mother's letter, holding it against his chest like a talisman. They stood on shaking legs and looked back at the house. It seemed smaller now, less imposing. Just a building. Just wood and stone and darkness that only had power if you gave it power. But they weren't done. Sarah's eyes blazed with determination. We can't leave them there. All those people, those spirits, they're trapped because they believe the house's lies. We have to free them. Marcus wanted to argue. Every cell in his body screamed to run and never look back. But he knew she was right. They'd been given something the others hadn't, each other's strength at exactly the right moment. They had to pay that forward. They gathered materials from Marcus's truck, still parked in front of the house, untouched. Gasoline from the can he kept for the generator. Rags. Matches. The house seemed to sense what they planned. Lights flickered on inside. The door slammed open and shut. But it couldn't move. Couldn't leave its foundation. Could only wait and rage. The families deserve to know, Sarah said, dousing the front porch with gasoline. Every single letter needs to find its recipient. They'd photographed all of them with their phones before leaving the basement. Hundreds of images of love denied and regret unspoken. They'd post them online. They'd mail them to addresses. They'd make sure every word reached the person it was meant for. Marcus lit the first match. The flames caught instantly, eager. Fire spread up the porch, catching the dry wood like kindling. They backed away as the house began to burn. And inside, they saw the figures. But they weren't screaming anymore. They were smiling, grateful, released at last from the house that had fed on their pain for so long. The house burned through the night. By morning it was nothing but ash and twisted metal, smoke rising into a dawn that felt like promise. The fire department came, asked questions, took notes. Sarah and Marcus told them the truth, most of it. The house had been dangerous, structural problems. They'd barely escaped. The firefighters nodded, sympathetic, never suspecting the real story. 3 days later, Sarah called her father. He answered on the first ring, his voice breaking when he heard her voice. "Sarah? Oh God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. We were wrong. So wrong. Please come home." She cried into the phone, telling him she forgave him, that she loved him, that yes, she and Marcus would come home. Marcus made similar calls. His mother sobbed so hard she couldn't speak. His father said 6 words, "I love you. Please forgive me." It wasn't eloquent. It didn't need to be. It was real. The letters they'd photographed made their way into the world. They created a website, posted the images with a simple message. To all the families who cast out those they loved, they never stopped loving you. And you never stopped loving them. Don't let pride steal what matters most. The site went viral. Families reunited. Apologies were made. Love won over and over again. Sarah and Marcus moved back to town, but not to their old homes. They found a small apartment together, building their life on their own terms. Their families visited regularly. Relationships healed slowly, imperfectly, but they healed. Scars remained, but scars prove you survived. 6 months after the fire, they received a letter. No return address. Inside was a deed to a plot of land, the land where the house had stood, and a note in handwriting Sarah didn't recognize. "Thank you for freeing us. The land is yours now. Build something beautiful there. Build something that feeds on love instead of pain." They sold the land and used the money to start a foundation, a shelter for people cast out by their families for who they loved, a place that offered support without judgment, help without conditions. They called it the second choice, because sometimes your first choice is taken from you, but your second choice can still be beautiful. On their first anniversary after the house, Sarah and Marcus stood at the edge of the empty lot. Wildflowers had grown where the foundation once stood. The earth had reclaimed what was hers. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Choosing me over them?" Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I regret that I had to choose. But I don't regret who I chose. I never will." They walked away from the empty lot hand in hand, leaving the past buried where it belonged. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Sarah would remember the figures in the basement, the way they smiled when the flames came, the way they thanked her and Marcus for remembering what they'd forgotten. That love, real, chosen love, is worth fighting for. Always. The house was gone, but its lesson remained. Some families are born, some are chosen, and the ones you choose, the ones you fight for, despite the cost, those are the ones that make you who you truly are. Sarah and Marcus had chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, and in doing so, they'd saved not just themselves, but all the lost souls the house had consumed before them. They'd learned that rejection isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better one. Sometimes the family that cast you out comes back humbled and grateful. Sometimes the house that tries to trap you actually sets you free. And sometimes, just sometimes, choosing love over everything else is exactly the right choice, even when it feels impossible. The wildflowers grew thicker each year, covering the scar where the house once stood. Children played there now, unaware of the darkness that used to feed in that spot. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, the freed spirits watched over them, making sure no building would ever rise on that cursed foundation again. They'd paid the price for believing love needed approval. They'd make certain no one else ever had to pay it too. Sarah and Marcus built their life together one day at a time, proof that when you choose love, really choose it, with your whole heart despite every obstacle, it chooses you back. And that choice, that mutual selection, is more powerful than any curse, any rejection, any house that feeds on pain. Because love, real love, doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. It just needs two people willing to fight for it, even when the whole world says no, even when houses try to trap them, even when families turn their backs. Real love survives. It always finds a way. And their story, the story of the outcast couple who found a house with a terrible secret and chose each other anyway, became a legend, a reminder, a promise to anyone who's ever been rejected for loving the wrong person. Your family might abandon you, but true love never will. Hold on to each other. Fight for each other. Choose each other again and again. Because in the end, that choice is the only one that truly matters.